Have you ever just stood in the middle of a city and wondered, is there any logic to this chaos? Well, it turns out there is. Cities aren't just a random jumble of buildings. They're actually complex systems with a kind of hidden blueprint, and today we're going to decode it together. Okay, so think about this for a second. Why are all the giant skyscrapers and big banks packed into the most expensive real estate downtown, while most people's homes are spread out for miles and miles on the edge of the city? The answer to that simple question, well, it unlocks the entire secret of how our cities are put together. For decades, geographers have been kind of obsessed with this urban puzzle. They've come up with some really powerful models to understand the hidden patterns, like why certain people live where they do, and how businesses decide where to set up shop. When you boil it all down, it comes down to just one thing: competition. You've got businesses, factories, and regular people all vying for the best possible location. And that constant competition, it actually creates a predictable, logical structure that we can map out. And what's driving all that competition? It's a super simple but fundamental idea: the price of a place. It's a concept called the bid-rent theory, and it sounds kind of academic, but it's really straightforward. The land right in the heart of the city, the Central Business District, or CBD, is the most valuable because it's the easiest for everyone to get to. Everybody wants a piece of it. So the farther you move away from that center, the less you have to bid for that land. The price just goes down. And you can see this so clearly in real life. A huge bank or a corporate headquarters can afford that sky-high rent in the CBD. But as you move out through what's called the zone of transition and into the suburbs, that cost just plummets. It's literally why you can have a backyard in the burbs, but not on Wall Street. So, remember this one simple rule, because it's the engine that drives pretty much every decision about how a city gets laid out. The closer to the center, the higher the price. Got it? Good, because that's the key to all the models we're about to dive into. All right, so how does this theory actually look in the real world? Well, the very first attempts to map it came from studying the absolutely explosive growth of industrial cities in North America. And Chicago was the poster child. The first blueprint they came up with was a concentric zone model. Just picture a city growing outward in a series of perfect rings, like ripples in a pond. Right at the bullseye, you've got the CBD, the business hub. The next ring out is a mix of factories and low-cost housing. As you keep moving out, the houses get nicer and the lots get bigger, until you hit the wealthy commuter zone on the very edge. It's a perfect picture of that bid-rent theory in action. But of course, real life is always messier, right? Cities aren't perfect circles. The huge thing this first model completely ignored was how people actually get from point A to point B. The next model fixed that by adding the one thing that changed everything: transportation. And that brings us to the Hoyt sector model. This guy, Homer Hoyt, argued that cities don't go in rings, they grow in wedges, kind of like slices of a pie. And these wedges radiate out from the center, following major transportation lines like railways and big roads. So the wealthiest residents might build their homes along a beautiful riverfront corridor, while industrial workers would live in a totally separate wedge near the factories. Suddenly, the map of the city starts to look a lot more like reality. But even that wasn't the full picture. Because what happens when a city stops having just one all-powerful center? What happens when the city kind of shatters into a bunch of different pieces? Well, that's the idea behind the multiple nuclei model. It recognized that modern cities have more than one hub. Think about it. An airport creates its own little center with hotels and logistics companies. A big university creates a nucleus of cafes and student housing. All these different activities start clustering together around their own special nodes, which means the city no longer revolves around just a single downtown. And then came the invention that basically blew all the old models to smithereens: the automobile. All of a sudden, you weren't tied to a streetcar line or a train station. You could live pretty much anywhere. And that freedom, it created the ultimate decentralized city. This gives us the galactic city model, where the original downtown is just one star in a whole galaxy of activity. These edge cities pop up on the outskirts, suburban hubs with their own offices, malls, and entertainment, all connected by a web of highways and beltways. You could literally live, work, and shop entirely in the suburbs without ever needing to go downtown at all. So just to recap the North American models real quick, we went from perfect rings to wedges driven by transportation, to multiple nodes, and finally to a sprawling, decentralized galaxy powered by the car. Each model tells a piece of the story, But that's just one part of the world. So now we're going to shift gears and get a global perspective, because the patterns we just looked at, they are definitely not universal. Things like colonial history and different economic forces created entirely different city blueprints all over the world. Let's start in Latin America. The structure of many cities here is deeply, deeply rooted in their history as Spanish colonial outposts. This model has a strong CBD. With a high-end commercial boulevard, they call it a spine, extending out from it. The city's elite live in a fancy residential sector right next to this spine. But in sharp, stark contrast, the outer edges of the city have what are called disamenity zones. These are squatter settlements that often lack basic services like running water. The inequality is literally built right into the structure of the city. Okay, now let's jump over to Southeast Asia. Here, the city's structure wasn't shaped by a central plaza, but by colonial trade and having access to the sea. In this model, the economic heart of the city isn't a downtown business district, it's the port. That's the center of gravity. The most valuable real estate and the high-class homes are all located near the port and the government offices. And it's got this unique feature, a market gardening zone on the outskirts, specifically for growing fresh food to supply the city. And finally, we've got the sub-Saharan African city model. And this one might be the most complex of them all, because it reflects a blend of traditional culture, colonial rule, and modern development all in the same place. Get this. This model often has a triple CBD. You've got the old colonial center, a traditional open-air market, and a modern business district, all existing side by side. Residential areas are often divided by ethnicity, which is a direct legacy of colonial policies. And, much like the Latin American model, the very outermost ring often consists of impoverished shantytowns. So, from simple rings to these really complex global patterns, these models are basically a toolkit for understanding the logic of our urban world. They show how things like transportation and history have a huge impact on our daily lives. But none of these models are the final story, which leads to one last big question. As our work and our lives move more and more online, what's the center of the next city even going to look like? What's the next blueprint?